Hey there, guys. Welcome to my new series called Homebrew Review. In case you don't know who I am, my name is Brook, or That One Undead DM, and I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition for around 7 years now. And I've also been part of the optimization community for about 2 to 3 years now. And today we're going to be reviewing The Bloodhunter by Matthew Mercer. We're going to take an objective look at this class. We're going to see how it fares against other martial classes similar to it, its damage output, its supportability, its customizability, and overall just how well it fares against the other classes. So without further ado, let's get started. So right off the bat, you're going to notice that it is a martial class like I stated before. It doesn't really have a lot of spellcasting outside of a subclass called the Profane Soul, which uses the Warlock method of casting spells. But we will go over that a little bit later. So right here, the first issue is that it relies on intelligence. Now, I'm not saying a class relying on intelligence is a bad thing. After all, we have the Wizard and the Artificer. However, for a class that supposedly is choosing a path that gives you some kind of cause and mutates your blood in whatever way that the subclasses tell you, it seems a bit strange that its primary stat, outside of its combat stat being either strength or dexterity, is intelligence rather than constitution, because blood is in your body. You kind of need blood to survive, and it's your life force, which is what the constitution stat is. So I think the first thing here is that we would need to change this to constitution. Would this mean that this would be purely based on the 3 major stats? Sure. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, as we don't really have a class in the game currently that is reliant on constitution outside of spellcasters and their spells. There's not really a spellcaster that uses Constitution as their spellcasting modifier, and there's no class that uses Constitution in a meaningful way. So I think that would be very interesting. One thing that I would say that Matthew Mercer did pretty well here is that they changed the Hemocraft damage from a flat amount to a die roll. I think that was a very nice change, because before it was a very weird rules confusion, because you took damage equal to the fixed amount, but then you would also lose maximum HP. So it was a big controversial, not controversial, but a very big confusing rule where do you take damage first and then you reduce your maximum HP, or do you reduce your maximum HP and then take damage? So in the first example, you would, if you had 10 HP, you would take 3 damage, and then you'd be at 7 out of 10 HP. But then you'd have to reduce your HP down by 3, since you took damage for your Crimson Right. However, the question is, does it become 7 out of 7? This way you're just reducing your max HP, or do you reduce your health along with it to match the amount of damage you took? So would you reduce your maximum to 7 and then reduce your HP down to like 3? This way you'd still have a 3-point damage, which was terrible. So I'm glad that he just changed it to a straight, you just take damage equal to this die. That was nice. Where I have to dock him points, though, is the lack of blood curses at early levels. Having only 1 blood curse for 5 levels, which, by the way, at this point, at level 3 and 5, paladins can already outdamage you. It is very sad that paladins have more resources and can do more damage than the Bloodhunter in an instant rather than the Bloodhunter. Because the blood curses we'll get into later are kind of weak when in comparison the previous version were actually pretty strong. So having access to only 1 that I think you can only change on a long rest is not that good. What I would change here is give them access to at least 2 blood curses to start, and then slowly grow them to 6 blood curses, and also just buff some of the blood curses in general. And bring some of the old blood curses back. Some of them were actually pretty fine. Next up, D10 hit die is pretty good. So I did the math. You were getting about 176.5 HP on average, since the average of a D10 is actually 5.5, not 6. Because if you add each number from a D10, so you add 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, etc., and then you divide it by 10, you get 5.5. It's the true average, but since we don't deal in percentages in the book, you have to go with 6. It's always rounded up. So, on average, you're getting around 176 HP if you have a plus 3 constitution at level 1, which if you're going with point buy with this class, you probably might get if you spend your points wisely. Light armor, medium armor, and shields. It's a little bit weird considering how a lot of the abilities, specifically the Crimson Right here, it says your damage is magical. So the fact that you can play as a ranged Bloodhunter and still have access to medium armor, yeah, that's similar to what the fighter and the ranger can do. So I think it's a little bit strange that you can be ranged and you don't have access to all armor and shields like the other marshals can. Because if you're trying to go melee, being restricted to a medium armor is kinda not that good. Especially since this is multi-ability score reliant, as it requires either strength or dexterity, then constitution and intelligence, so it's a 3-ability split. I think it would have been fine just to give them the armor, because yeah, if you're going for a dex build of ranged weapons, then yeah, you're gonna have the same amount of armor as a martial fighter who's going with a heavier armor. But generally speaking, having a dex with armor is only really good at lower levels, because the lower level armors, they only give you like a +5. But then once you get to higher levels, it's better to swap out to a more tanky armor or focus more on your survivability aspect, like spells and buffs from your allies, magic items like a Cloak of Displacement, just general things to make and also the dodge action. Dodge action's pretty good. Simple and martial weapons, pretty standard. Alchemist supplies makes sense. Dexterity and intelligence, like I said, I don't think intelligence needs to be here. I would prefer like strength or constitution, like strength and constitution, or maybe like constitution and intelligence, because while I don't agree that intelligence should be here, you can't put two strong ability scores in the same thing, because in 5e, if you noticed all of the classes, they have 2 ability scores that you don't think would go well together, or they make sense for the class. But in optimization, when you're speaking about ability scores, there are 3 good ones and 3 bad ones generally. They're not really bad, they're just not that useful a lot of the time, but are still good to have. So the 3 best ones to have proficiencies in are Dexterity, Constitution, and Wisdom. And this is because I had a person in the Pack Tactics server, Discord server, a while back send me several photos of every spell in 5th edition that relies on a saving throw of some kind, whether it does damage or not. And I think around 30% of the spells require a wisdom saving throw, and then another 30 require a dex. And then the other 40% is split between strength, charisma, and intelligence, but nothing beats wisdom. And then obviously the other 3 are charisma, intelligence, and strength, because there's not a lot of things that require them. I think the skill selection's fine. Religion makes sense. Survival makes sense. Equipment doesn't really matter all that much. Though I think the limitation of a single martial weapon and 2 simple weapons is pretty standard. Though I would have liked to see maybe like a martial weapon, 2 simple weapons, and then maybe like another thing that's like a light crossbow and 20 bolts, or a martial weapon and a shield. This way you didn't have to spend extra money for a shield, but you know, that's just my personal preference. Alright, now it's on to the first ability, Hunter's Bane. So, if we look at Hunter's Bane, the first part is basically just a ribbon feature. Advantage on survival checks against 3 different types of creature types, and intelligence checks to recall information. So, history or religion, I think. But either way, it's just kind of a ribbon feature. The main one here is that your Hunter's Bane empowers your body to control the shape of your Hemocraft magic using your own blood and life essence to fuel your abilities. Some of them require them to make a saving throw, and standard 8 plus proficiency plus your modifier. Once again, I'd say this would make more sense as a constitution based ability. Yes, this would make the class more reliant on constitution and would make it very, very tanky in terms of HP, but when you take into consideration that a little over 90% of the monster manual, Mordenkainen's, Volo's, pretty much any book that has a monster in it, 90% of them are melee. They don't really have ranged options. And if they do have ranged options, they're very limited ranged options, or they're more, here's a skeleton snap luck. If you want to give the skeleton a weapon, use this proficiency bonus and then use the weapon. So it's more of a pick and choose. So if you want to homebrew your enemies to have more ranged options in this, it's still going to be good. But the fact that if you read later in terms of Crimson Right, you have to take damage. So losing HP, it's kind of a resource. You use your HP as a resource in order to stay alive. So it says right here, you can activate any right that you know on one weapon you're holding, and you have to take necrotic damage equal to a roll of your Hemocraft die that cannot be reduced. So you roll your Hemocraft die and you take damage. Losing health before a fight even officially begins, yes, rolling initiative counts as the start of combat, but having to take even the smallest amount of damage, it's not that bad to start. But the fact that you have to take damage in order to use an ability is just generally not that good unless it gives you a super big benefit. So the reason why the Evocation Wizard, though it is still a very strong subclass, but its ability to cast spells to do the maximum damage and take necrotic damage for it after the first use is still kind of strong, is because you essentially just deal the most amount of damage. There's no caveats with it. It just happens. You want your fireball to deal 36 points of damage because you rolled 8d6? Just use this. It's fine. It just happens. And that's fine. But, or sorry, 48. I apologize. Not 36, 48. Math was a little bit off. But if we go back up to Crimson Right, you'll notice that it starts at a d4. The average of a d4 is 2.5. You are taking, on average, 2.5 damage to deal an additional 2.5 damage each round. As a bonus action. Once again, bonus action. This would be fine if it was just as a free action. And that's because if we look at a ranger at level 1 who with +3 dexterity and the crossbow expert feat, the hand crossbow does an additional 3.5 damage because it rolls a d6. Then you add +3, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just double check on that but essentially, with a ranger, you can attack with a hand crossbow, and then have another hand crossbow, and then just do an additional 3.5 damage with the addition of another addition of your dexterity on top of that. So, yep, it doesn't say you don't add your proficiency or your not your proficiency, but the attack modifier to that bonus action attack. So, if we look at it here, if we take this math, let me just get back to the Bloodhunter right quick. No, yeah, there we go, Bloodhunter. So, assuming a Bloodhunter is using a hand crossbow too, he is dealing himself, on average, at level 1, 2.5 damage. And he's only dealing, assuming plus 3 dexterity as well, he's dealing 3.5 plus 3, 6.5, and you have to take into a chance to hit, so you have to multiply by 0.65, which gives you around 4.225 damage every round. So that. But you're also taking 2.5 damage on average. Take into consideration the ranger who does 3.5. Let me see if I can get this to expand. No, that's not what I wanted to do. Scientific, here we go. So if we take into consideration, we do 3.5, nope, plus 3, and then we multiply that by 2. Sorry, let me just try to do this again. So we take 3.5 times 2, that's 7. Then we add, oh dang, I apologize. My math is not as well off as it should be right now. So, once again, we take the same. So, because it's a first hit, you take 3.5, then you add 3, and then you multiply it by 0.65 to get 4.225. However, you're getting a bonus action attack. So, then you would take that 6.5 that we calculated for the first attack, you'd multiply it by 0.65, you get 4, and then you would add 4.225, and you'd get 8.45 damage. So a ranger at level 1 with a feat can do the same thing, but because a Bloodhunter has to use its bonus action in order to use its Crimson Right to do an additional d4 damage, which if we actually calculate that in, we would take 3.5 plus 2.5 plus 3 times 0.65, it's 5.85. So 5.85 versus 8.45. That's a 3 damage difference, which may not seem like a lot, but that's 3.5 damage. That's around 3 damage that you're not going to make up for in a timely manner. You're probably going to make it up in like 2 or 3 rounds, but the ranger is going to keep outputting. He's going to keep outputting that 8.45 damage. So if we take 8.45, not 5.4, 4.5, and we multiply it by 3 rounds, assuming that he's doing this each round, that's 25.35 damage. So over the course of 3 rounds, he's dealing 25, almost 26 damage. But if we take that 5.85, but then we also take the 3.6 or 3.5 plus 2.5, and then plus 3, multiplied by 0.65, we're going to get 5.85. But then, if we take 3, nope, we add 3.5 plus 2.5 plus 3 for the bonus action attack, and then we multiply that by 0.65, we get another 5.85. So if we multiply this by 2, because it's happening on both attacks as an action and a bonus action on the second turn, you're getting 11.7. So if we multiply this by 2, we get 23.4. So then we take the 5.85 and we add 5.85, which equals 29.25. So over the course of 3 rounds, you are dealing 4 points of damage more, but the fact that you had to lose the additional 3 damage at the start It may seem inconsequential, but it's really impactful, especially at level 1. At level 1, if you're missing out on 3 damage, it's not that good, and the fact that it takes you this long to match a ranger is not that fantastic, but it's not as bad as it should be. Especially since we didn't count for the +2 to archery for fighting styles. It's just a standard. 65% of the time, it's an average to hit. It's not an overall specific, if you have this modifier with this and this and this. It's a generalist calculation that you can use to give you a very rough estimate as to how good or bad something is in terms of damage. But if you want to get more specific, that's when you'd have to start adding in all the bonuses and all that. So, with that, I still think it should be Constitution. But the Blood Maledict is where we're going to get interesting here. So, you learn a Blood Curse, and you get 1 additional Blood Curse, and each time you learn a new Blood Curse, you can replace 1. And you can amplify it, taking necrotic damage equal to your Hemocraft, can't be reduced in any way, and you can't do it again until you finish a short or long rest, and you can only use the Blood Maledict twice. Once, twice at 6th level, and 3 times 13th level, and then 4 times at 17th level. So, okay. Having access to 1 Blood Curse, and it being on a short rest, you would think that if it said short, if this whole section was right here, this whole section right here of short or was just straight up removed, and it just said you must finish a long rest before you can use it again, then it would make sense why you would only get 1, because you're only going to be able to use one or the other anyway. But if it says short or long rest, that means they are expecting this to be more of a short rest orientated class, since you can use these every short rest. So having access to only 1 at this level, when 2 levels later, at level 3, Battle Masters get 4 dice and I think 3 to 4 different techniques that they can pick from at level 3, when this one doesn't even have access to 2 blood curses yet. Don't know about that one, Chief. Especially since you only get an additional blood curse at 6th level. That's an additional 3 levels you have to wait just to get another blood curse. And remember, each time you learn a new blood curse, you could choose a blood curse you know and replace it with another. Meaning this is level restricted. You have to reach a level in which you get a blood curse. Have to. This isn't a you take a long rest or you level up and you can change these. This is directly baked in here when you learn a new blood curse. But what does it say right here? You learn 1 additional blood curse at 6th, 10th, 14th, and 18th. Meaning, if you find out at level 1 through 5 that a blood curse just isn't working, you have to wait until level 6 to change it. But then you get an additional one. And then if you find out that one of those blood curses aren't working, you have to wait all the way to level 10 to change it. And so on and so on and so on. So, how I would change this feature is keep all this the same. Basically keep all the flavor text, yada yada yada, amplifying. But make it so that you learn 1 additional blood curse at these levels, same as before. Maybe lower this to 4, like level 4. This way you get something besides an ability score improvement at level 4. I think that would be a nice little boost there. Maybe at level 5 with extra attack. This way you can use your blood curse and your extra attack in the same level. And then like lower this to 9, lower this to 13. Maybe give them an additional blood curse somewhere in here. This way you a nice even 6. And then each time you level up or learn a new blood curse, you could change one of them that you know. Or what I would personally do is change it entirely to where you get a number of blood curses, you know a number of blood curses, and you can use them, and then after a certain amount of uses, like maybe based on proficiency bonus, like what we're going with 1D&D right now, you can use your blood curses a number of times per short or long rest equal to your proficiency bonus, and then over the course of a long rest, you can change a blood curse with a different blood curse that you meet the prerequisites for. I think that would be a lot more of a customizable option, similar to the Warlock invocations. Yes, I know that the Warlock invocations have a system in place that makes it so you can't change them on a long rest, but I think that'd be really, really interesting. Another thing I would possibly change is the ability to amplify them to maybe you can take more damage if you wanted to amplify, because right now it's just by taking necrotic damage equal to a roll. So at lower levels it's a lot more of a detriment because your HP is so much lower. But at higher levels it's not really much of a detriment anymore because you have such high HP and your Hemocraft die, even at the biggest, is only a D10. So it's not really that bad, but maybe at lower levels, because you don't really have much control over it in terms of thematics, change it to maybe twice, but that's just me. I would personally just remove it entirely, like just remove the Hemocraft taking damage aspect of it. Then again, that would kind of defeat the spirit of the Bloodhunter as being a blood-based person that, self-harms in order to do that. Trigger warning. But that's just me. Fighting style is pretty standard. Archery, dueling, great weapon, 2-weapon. I do find it a little bit odd that after Tasha's Cauldron came out and they added the new fighting styles like unarmed fighting, blind fighting, that it didn't get updated with anything. I think that's a little bit strange. I'd personally give them like thrown weapon fighting because I think throwing a dagger coated in your own blood would be pretty interesting. Uh, Maybe defense, something more to go with the melee style that they're going here. And plus, it would give people more than just archery to go with their thrown weapons. This way, they actually have a thrown weapon fighting style. Crimson Rites. So, Crimson Rite, it lasts until you finish a short or long rest. That's fine. It's still a bonus action, which I explained before is not much of a detriment later on, like early on in the game, because sorry, not later on, but early on in the game, because you're not really dealing that much damage. But the fact that you're losing 3 damage to activate an additional 2.5 damage is not that good. If it was a little bit better, maybe. But they're magical, extra damage, and you get a Crimson Rite. So the only ones that you have access to start are either fire, cold, or lightning. So fire damage you're never going to really want to use because fire damage is the second most resistant / immune damage type in the entire monster manual, next to obviously poison. And cold and lightning are very situational because cold doesn't really affect a lot of like undead or constructs, but neither does lightning. So if your DM is a bit evil and decides to do that, yeah. And also another thing besides the damage types being in general not that fantastic, but again not that bad either, considering how fire damage is the most common, as is cold, lightning's pretty standard, and the more powerful ones are locked behind level requirements, is this little one right here. A weapon can hold only one active right at a time and other creatures cannot gain it. So this begs the question. It requires your bonus action. It requires you to take damage. It lasts for for as long as you don't take a short or long rest, and each weapon can only hold one right. So if for whatever reason you wanted to do the less optimal fighting style of 2-weapon fighting, this would mean that you'd have to use your bonus action for 2 turns, losing 3.5 damage, because if you're using short swords, it's a d6. So if you're losing 3.5 damage for that additional attack for 2 rounds, just to get an additional 2.5 damage on each one. I would just make it so that when you activate your Crimson Rite, it could affect multiple weapons. But again, that's just my personal opinion. I think the damage type should be changed a little bit, and you should be able to use it on each weapon that you're holding rather than... Another thing I would possibly change is the damage types and when you get them. So once again, the earlier damage types are fine. They're pretty standard, but Necrotic, Psychic, and Thunder. It's very weird that they put Thunder here as opposed to like Force. So yes, I know that Force is kind of the thing that the Ghost Slayer gets, where they get their own Crimson Right, and it does Radiant. Like each one gets their own Crimson Right. But the fact that by base you don't get that, you don't get the abilities to use Force, is a bit strange to me. That's about it, and maybe like more than 7 and 14th, because I think having more damage types at your disposal when the wizard can just Fireball, Lightning Bolt, Cone of Cold, Circle of Death, Psychic Lance, stuff like that. I think that's kind of sad that a martial who focuses on different damage types and using your blood is a bit sad that you don't get a lot of the more potent damage types that would be prevalent on weapons. So next up on the chopping block would be the brand of castigation. So we're going to skip over the Bloodhunter order because we're going to get to those later. Ability score improvement's pretty standard. When it comes to the extra attack, it's not that impactful. It still helps, but I think just having a single extra attack is not really going to help you all that much in the damage department. As if you were to run the numbers with a fighter and a ranger and compare it to this, you'd with the crossbow expert feat on all of them plus 3 dexterity, you'd get very similar damage output from the ranger and the fighter, and you get a little bit more damage with the Bloodhunter, but the fact that for the first 3 rounds you're losing your bonus action to activate it on both of your hand crossbows, you're really losing some damage early on while they're just racking it up. And the fighter especially, it does not as much damage as the ranger if she casts like conjure animals and they could just do more damage. Not much we could do about that. So we're just going to skip over the generalist parts that pretty much every class has. So we're going to do this. So the brand of castigation, when you damage a creature with a weapon that you have a Crimson Right on, so it doesn't have to be melee or ranged, you can cause it to brand the person. And it's basically Hunter's Mark, because you always know where they are, as long as they're on the same plane. And each time the branded creature deals damage, or a creature you can see within 5 feet of you, the branded creature takes psychic damage equal to your Hemocraft modifier. Which again, if we go back up to Hunter's Bane, is either your Wisdom or Intelligence. Once again, if this was Constitution, it'd be a little bit more interesting, but the brand of castigation only dealing a flat bonus as opposed to a die roll, it's a little bit less gambly and it's a more consistent. But the fact is you have to hit them first, and it's when you hit them, not if. So it's when, so if it happens, it happens. And another interesting thing here is that there is... Oh, no, I stand corrected. I take that back. So, you can brand them, and each time the creature deals damage to you or a creature within 5 feet of you. So it's not just a creature you can see, meaning it could be anywhere between 60 to maybe 120 feet. It could be, it's just a creature you could see within 5 feet of you, which I don't know how you're not seeing a creature within 5 feet of you. So this small portion doesn't need to be here. It just can be, or a creature within 5 feet of you. It doesn't have to be you can see. Because at that point, it would only trigger on you if you have the blinded condition, which I think is fine. But if you took blind fighting from Tasha's Cauldron, you'd be fine. It takes psychic damage. It lasts until you dismiss it or until you apply it to another creature. It can be dispelled, and it's treated as a spell with a level equal to half your Bloodhunter level with a maximum of a 9th level spell, and it's only once per short or long rest. So, once again, if this was a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus, because if you look at it very carefully, unlike Hunter's Mark, you can't move it. It's just, if you hit Goon 1 and you brand him for however long he's alive, you can deal him psychic damage if he hits you or anyone within 5 feet of you, whatever. But the problem is, it's once per short or long rest. So, you can only use it on Goon 1, which obviously is not the smart move. You'd want to use it on the boss. But the point is that this is more of a boss shredding tool in the sense of you put it on the boss and you just leave it there. You never use it on just like normal goons. You use it on the biggest, baddest MF there. And it can be dispelled, meaning since it acts like dispel magic, you can't really use it on something that has like an anti-magic cone, such as an Astral Dreadnought or a Beholder, because it's a magical effect that they can see, and their anti-magic cone is like dispel magic, but in a cone. So you can't brand those creatures, which kind of sucks. And once again, you can't move it. So if Goon 1 dies by any means, you just wasted your sigil, your brand, and you just can't use it again. Maybe it would be better if we wanted to stick with the theme of taking damage to use your abilities. We can make it so that you get one free use every short or long rest, and then every use after that you take a roll of your Hemocraft die and damage. But once again, if we want to stick away from the damaging yourself in order to make this a better martial class overall, it would just be a number of times per proficiency bonus, pretty standard. And then next up is Grim Psychometry. So before, this was pretty interesting. So whenever you make a history check to recall information about an object that you are touching or your current location, advantage, and at the DM's discretion, you may, experience brief visions of the object. Again, another ribbon feature, doesn't impact combat, doesn't really impact anything in terms of mechanically, more of lore and roleplay wise. So it's not really that much to talk about. I think it's fine, it could stay. Dark Augmentation. Your speed increases by 5 feet. Bonus to strength, dexterity, and con saving throws equal to your Hemocraft modifier, so +1. And I think that's interesting because Rangers at an earlier level, I think level 6, whenever they get their optional feature from Tasha's Cauldron, get an increase of speed of +5 feet. They get an additional 5 to 10 feet of movement, I think, and they get a unique movement speed, such as a swimming or a climbing speed. And on top of that, they get a healing, and they get all this other stuff. But at 10th level, you just get at minimum a +1, and at maximum +5, which is a significant thing when it comes to a Constitution and Dexterity. You just get a free +5 from that. I just think it comes a little late, because when we're talking about calculating how optimal something is, we typically stop between level 10 and level 14, because at that point, it's pretty much endgame, because not a lot of games reach past that point. So to have to wait till basically the endgame to get a +5, it's a little bit strange to me, but not that bad. It's still a +5 at the end of the day. Brand of Tethering. Your Brand of Castigation is now 2 times your Hemocraft, and they can't take the dash action. If they attempt to teleport or leave from the plane, they take 46 psychic damage, make a Wisdom save, and on a failed save, they just fail the teleport. This would be better if it just stopped it outright, but I can understand the need for a save. Because dealing damage and making sure they can't teleport's a little bit strong in some people's eyes, but not to me. Hardened Soul. At level 14, you have advantage on being charmed and frightened. Something, half of this ability, elves just kind of get. Elves, half-elves, drow, wood elf, pretty much every elf just gets the ability to have advantage on saving throws against being charmed by default. So this doesn't really, and it's a little bit late. It's a little bit late. At this point, rogues get Slippery Mind, which give them proficiency in wisdom saving throws, which is a pretty big deal since you don't have to waste a feat on it, but, you know. So, like I was saying, the brand of tethering is fine. It's not really all that good, because, you know, the dash action, enemies don't really use it all that much. They're mainly using their attack unless they really need to get in, like, all the melee people, which is 90% of them. But a lot of them have double your movement speed as a PC anyway. The teleporting aspect is nice, but the fact that it says attempt to teleport or to leave its current plane, so it can't even Misty Step because it's considered a teleport. So this is good for like teleporting enemies, but once again, it comes in a little too late. Like I could play a Horizon Walker and probably do a little bit better, or a that one Paladin Oath, the Watchers. They do a pretty good job at this. Hardened Soul, once again, kind of just something that the elves get by baseline at halfway point. The Frightened condition is nice, like the Frightened condition advantage is nice, but other than that, not really much. Sanguine Mastery. Once per turn, whenever a Bloodhunter feature requires you to roll a Hemocraft die, you can re-roll it. And whenever you score a critical hit with a weapon that has a Crimson Rite, you regain 1 use of your Blood Maledict. So, at level 20, this is a terrible ability. This is a terrible ability. Because it's a level 20, so at this point, the game is already unbalanced. It's so unbalanced because clerics can just call upon their deities whenever they want. And they can just say, hey, hey God, could you just do a favor for me? And the DM is just gonna say, yeah, sure, within reason. And wizards can just say, I cast Wish, and I do this, this, and this, and that's part of the spell, so you could just get more money, more spells, pretty standard stuff. So, being able to essentially get the same ability that wild magic sorcerers and wild magic barbarians get at like 14th level to reroll a die, 4 to 6 levels later, but you still have to take damage, and you only get a use of your Blood Maledict back if you score a critical hit, with no augmentation of your critical hit range anywhere in here. Relying on a 0.5% chance, or a 0.05% chance to get a use back is not a good ability. If this was similar to like a bard ability, where if you roll initiative and you have no uses of your Blood Maledict feature, you regain 1 use, it still wouldn't be good. It should be, if you roll initiative and you have no uses of your Blood Maledict feature, you regain all uses, but once you do this, you have to complete a short rest. This kind of allows you to use your Blood Maledicts more what's the word? More frequently, I guess is a word that I could use. You could use them more frequently and in a lot more situations and a lot more versatility, but the fact that you can only regain them on a critical hit with no increased on your critical hit range is not that good. And other than increased critical hit range, the only thing I would change, there's a lot of things I would change about this actually. So it would be instead of once per turn, you just remove that clause. Dumb clause. A once per turn is essentially just saying this effect can only take place once on your turn, but it can also happen on a turn that isn't yours in which you're using an opportunity attack, because it's a different turn, not a different round. So if this said round, it'd be even more dumb, but it's not. So what I would do is that this would just say, it would say, whenever you use a Bloodhunter feature that requires you to roll a Hemocraft die, you instead take 1. You instead just roll a 1, because you're dealing the least amount of damage to yourself, and you still get the benefit. Or, if we want to do it this way, we could go once per turn, whenever a blood feature requires you to use a Hemocraft die, such as your Crimson Right, you can just do it as a free action, if we didn't want to change the Crimson Right to be a free action in and of itself. So, and then finally, this last portion here, it would just be, additionally, once per short or long rest, you can regain all uses of your Blood Maledict feature as like a bonus action. Because I think using your bonus action to regain a use of one of your core features is a fine use, especially since Warlocks can do it after 1 minute outside of combat, but by that point they're already taking a short rest anyway, so they're going to get all their spell slots back anyway. This is mainly for a dungeon crawl type session where you're not really going to have long rests, you're mostly going to have short rests. So I would change this to be additionally whenever, once per short or long rest, you can regain all uses of your Blood Maledict feature, and any weapon that bears your Crimson Right deals double damage. So basically, you just deal 2 times your Crimson Right damage. In this, it's still not good. This is mainly just like a small brainstorming session. I'll probably rewrite this eventually, because I am a homebrewer. I'll probably rewrite this eventually to make it a little bit better. But now we're going to go on to the blood curses. So each one has a baseline ability and then the amplified version. I can tell you right now, I've read all of them, and I've read the 2016, 2018 version, whichever one came out originally. These blood curses, some of them are really, really bad. So Anxious is just bonus action, 30 feet, and you have advantage on intimidation checks against the creature. That's it. There's no save. It just happens. And the next wisdom save they make, if it's amplified, is at disadvantage. So this is basically a roleplay one, taking your, again, 1 use of this at lower levels, and then 2, 3, and 4 uses later on to just get essentially advantage and disadvantage on an intimidation check. Nothing else. Binding, bonus action, creature of large or small within 30 feet, make a strength save, and if they fail, their speed is reduced to 0 and they can't take reactions. And if you amplify it, you can use it for, the curse lasts for a minute instead of the end of your next turn. You can do it against a creature of any size, and they can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of their turns and ends of the curse on a success. So, this one's fine, but it's basically just hold person. It's a slightly better hold person because it uses it as a bonus action, and it's just a larger, smaller creature, and it doesn't specify humanoids like hold person does. And yes, there is hold monster or hold beast or whatever, but the fact that this works against anything is probably one of the better earlier ones. Bloated Agony, bonus action, creature that you can see within 30 feet. For the duration, until the end of your next turn, they have disadvantage on strength and dexterity checks. They take a d8 necrotic damage, and if it makes more than 1 attack during this turn. And if you amplify it, it lasts for 1 minute, and they can make a con save to end it. So this basically just gives them disadvantage on strength and dex checks, and if they make more than 1 attack, they take a d8 damage. But only once. If this was a d8 damage for every attack past the first, this would basically cripple not cripple them, but it would it would deter them from making more than one attack. This is basically like a minor version of slow. It's not good, and it's a single target, but you know, it's some kind of control that the Bloodhunter has. Next up, Blood Curse of Corrosion. This one's only for a level 15 Order of the Mutant. So, if you're going level 20 into Bloodhunter and you go level 15 Order and you go Order of the Mutant specifically, you, as a bonus action, you can cause a creature within 30 feet to be poisoned, and they can make a con save at the end of each of their turns to make a success. And the cursed creature takes 46 necrotic damage when you inflict it, and it takes this damage if it fails the saving throw. So, few problems with this. It's a bonus action, so again, you're still losing out on damage, but that's going to be kind of a running theme with a lot of these, is that you're going to be losing damage because you're using your bonus action. It's a level 15, so it's really, really high for an ability like this. And they have to be within 30 feet. That's not really much of a problem. But then they become poisoned. Like I said earlier in the video, poisoned condition and poison damage is the most resisted damage type and condition in the entire game. That's not even a contest. It is the most, hands down, definitive fact, the most resisted and the most immune damage type and condition. So the fact that you have to wait till level 15 to get this, it inflicts a condition that 80% of creatures in the monster manual are either resistant or immune to. But the damage, it scales with, it is half of a fireball, half of a third level fireball. Which, once again, if we take up the calculator, if we take the average of a d6, which is 4.5, and we multiply it by 4, that's only 18 damage. And mind you, this is a Constitution saving throw. And they only take this damage when you do it, when you inflict the curse on them, meaning they have to already not be resistant or immune to poison damage or the poison condition. Which, since this inflicts the poison condition, they'd already have to not be immune to the poison condition. So, if this dealt poison damage, it'd be even worse. But since it deals necrotic, we have to now base this off of the following. If the creature is not immune to the poison condition, they get affected. But now it's a con save. And a lot of creatures in the monster manual, they have high constitution saving throws because they're big, beefy beat sticks. That's all they are. They just walk up to you and hit you with a weapon or their fist or claws, tail, whatever. They just hit you really hard with their body. And so they're gonna have a high con. So let's go over what makes this one bad. It's a high level of level 15. You have to go a certain subclass to get it. You have to spend your bonus action losing damage in order to do this. It gives them a condition that 80 to 90% of the monster manual is immune to. It deals minimal damage, and it has a very common saving throw attached to it that most monsters, if not every monster, is going to have a high save in. So, it just overall, this is probably one of the worst ones. Mathematically speaking, because it does the least amount of damage on average. It has the most situational condition. It has one of the higher level requirements, like some of the others we're going to see, and it just doesn't do much in the grand scheme of things. It just doesn't. Exorcist, bonus action, 30 feet, that is charmed or frightened, or is under possession, and they just are no longer. And if you amplify it, the person who did the charm, frighten, or possession takes 3d6 psychic damage, and they have to make a save or be stunned. So once again, same issues. It's got a level 15 requirement, it's a specific subclass, and the conditions are, though they are very common here in the Charmed and Frightened, the possession effect isn't really that common. Only ghosts and some banshees can do it. And the fact that they have to fail this. They have to fail because it says you have to choose one that is charmed or frightened or is under possession. Meaning they have to fail a save on one of those 3 effects in order to benefit from this. But you're also taking this as a failsafe. it's better to prepare yourself and your party for success rather than failure. That's why things like what's the name of that cantrip? Spare the Dying isn't really taken because it's preparing you to fail. You are expecting to fail. With the Blood Curse of the Exorcist, you are expecting your party to fail. You are expecting to fail. And the worst part is, this doesn't even work on you. You have to choose somebody within 30 feet. So this doesn't work on you. Yeah, you have an advantage because of the previously mentioned Heart and Soul ability, but you're not immune, so you can't use this on yourself. And the creature being stunned and taking, what, 3d6 damage? Which on average is like 12 damage, 14 damage. It's not that good, and being stunned sure is nice, but I think paralyzation would have been better because that means your melee people, like you possibly, would be getting critical hits on melee weapon attacks against that creature. That would be so much better, but again, this is still preparing you to fail. Blood Curse of Exposure. When a creature within 30 feet of you takes damage from an attack or spell, you can use your reaction to weaken its resilience, and until the end of the creature's next turn, it loses resistance to all damage types dealt by the triggering attack or spell. And if you amplify it, they instead lose invulnerability to the damage, but has resistance to those damage types until the end of the turn. So this is basically something that I've made for the Barbarian called Sap Resistance, I believe. I'll have to look at it again. But essentially, the basic form of exposure turns resistance to normal damage, and then the amplified version turns immunity to resistance. But it says when a creature you can see within 30 feet of you takes damage from an attack roll. So if you have a caster who's fighting a red dragon, and they cast Fireball on them, you then can use your reaction and amplify it to cause the red dragon, who's normally immune to fire damage, to become resistant to fire damage instead. But it also works if the creature is just resistant. So they have resistance to cold damage and they hit them with like Ray of Frost or something, you can cause them to lose that resistance and now it just deals normal damage, which is fine. But the most common thing you're probably going to use this on are like non-magic weapons, because at this point you're probably not getting magic weapons that early, because your Crimson Rite doesn't come in until 2nd level. So at level 1, if you're playing a level 1 campaign, you're not gonna really have magic weapons. So this is really good for getting around those resistance to non-magic weapons, because you just can really screw them up that way. So it's a fine one. Definitely one that you would be very helpful later on and kind of helpful early. Eyeless. Blood Curse of the Eyeless. When a creature within 30 feet of you makes an attack, you can use your reaction, roll the Hemocraft die, and subtract the number rolled from the creature's attack. You can choose to use this feature before the creature's roll, but before the DM determines if the attack hits or misses. And the creature is immune to this curse if it is immune to the blind condition. And if you amplify it, you apply the curse to all the creature's attack rolls until the end of the creature's turn, and you roll separately for each attack. Okay, so before this used to just apply to blinded condition, and it used to apply it for like a minute if you amplified it, or some very strange thing like that. So this makes it a little bit better because it gives them a minus a D4, minus D6, D8, D10 on one attack roll. So it's basically Bard's Cutting Words. But if you amplify it, you can do it against all of their attacks. So this is one of the better ones to use really early on in the campaign, because you guys don't have a lot of high AC at the time, and you guys don't have a lot of HP. So being able to reduce any chance that they will hit you by any amount is seen as a good thing, because your armor class isn't that high, and the monsters to hit is probably going to be equal to or slightly greater than yours. So having this in your back pocket is a good choice, but only use it in emergencies. Fallen Puppet, personally one of my favorites, but not that good. When a creature within 30 feet of you drops to 0 hit points, you can use your reaction, and that creature immediately makes one weapon attack against a target of your choice within its range. And if you amplify it, the first you can first cause the cursed creature to move up to half its speed, and you granted a bonus to its attack roll equal to your Hemocraft modifier. Okay, so let me explain why this is both fun and bad. So, firstly, it's fun because if your ally ever drops to 0, you can just basically pick them back up to make one attack. And if you use your amplification, you can move them up to half their speed. So this works really well on like a monk who can essentially move 30 feet at later levels. And you can roll your Hemocraft, or you get a Hemocraft modifier to the attack roll. So on top of the creature's attack roll bonus, so if it's like a monk and they get a really high dexterity, they get magic fists, they get a bunch of things to help their fists hit harder and a lot more frequently, and you add your +5 onto that, you're essentially giving them the opposite of, or you're essentially giving them an additional attack while they're down, but you also give them a +5 to hit. So you're basically giving them a +5 plus their damage. It's basically Great Weapon Master / Sharpshooter because you're giving them a bonus to hit as opposed to a negative. So it's fun, but the fact that the stipulation is they have to drop to 0 hit points. Not die, but 0 hit points. So if they just get killed outright with power word kill, or they straight up fail all their death saves because the enemy crit them while they were unconscious and they failed 2 death saves, this doesn't work. It's once again like the blood curse of the Exorcist. You're kind of preparing for failure. So how I would change this one personally is that if a creature falls to 0 hit points, I'd probably keep this portion the same, but then amplified it, you can keep all this, but then the creature rises with 1 hit point. So it's basically a minor heal, but not really all that much. I don't know, I'd have to really think about this one because I like the flavor of it, but it just, in practice, it's not that good. Blood Curse of the Howl, an 18th level Order of the Lycan Blood Curse. As an action, you unleash a howl, and each creature within 30 feet of you must make a wisdom save or become frightened until the end of your next turn. And if it fails its saving throw by 5 or more, it is stunned, and a creature that succeeds on save is immune to it for the next 24 hours. And you can choose any number of creatures you can see to be unaffected. And the range, if it's amplified, increases to 60 feet. So, once again, it's too high of a level. It's too high of a level to be used in a normal campaign. Because 18th level, not a lot of campaigns are reaching that point. And if you are, congrats on you. You either have a really generous dungeon master, or you are the very generous dungeon master when it comes to levels, or you just don't care about how strong your players can get at later levels in terms of combat balance, and you're just kind of there for the story. And both are acceptable, but in terms of combat mechanics, in the terms of combat, this is not really going to be used all that much because you're not really going to reach this level on average. And also, once again, stunned, it's not as good as a condition as people think. Paralyzed would be a lot better because stunned is just not that good. Stunned, it makes it so they can't move and they can't really take actions and they fail certain saving throws, but paralyzed gives your martial melee classes crits on their melee attack rolls. It doesn't give it to anyone else. This helps close the martial spellcaster gap a little bit, because being able to guarantee critical hits on a target is fantastic. It's basically taking out the whole your crits are random factor, because now they're just guaranteed against this one person. So once again, I would probably change it to paralyzed, and it's immune 24 hours, it's unaffected, you could choose a number of creatures. I like that portion. 60 feet, it's fine. So overall, that's really the only thing I would change, and maybe lower the level to like 15 to match everything. even then, I'd probably still lower a lot of these, because you gotta give them equivalent power to the spellcasters. Because you gotta remember, at 18th level, wizards can just cast Wish. They can just wish for the big bad evil guy to disappear. And what can you do at 18th level as an Order of the Lycan? You can howl and frighten people. Ooh. Yeah, not that earth-shattering when the wizard can just go, hey, DM, yeah, I cast Wish, and I wish for my character to be level 20 in every class, and yeah, sure, the DM's not going to allow that, but the fact that they have the ability to do something as strong as that, and all you can do is this, it's laughable. Blood Curse of the Marked. Bonus action, you mark a creature within 30 feet, and until the end of your next turn, whenever you hit the cursed creature with a weapon, for which you have an active Crimson Rite, you can roll an additional Hemocraft die when determining extra damage. And if you amplify it, the next attack roll you make against the target has advantage. So you could take this anytime. It's still a bonus action, which sucks, so you're losing damage. It's within 30 feet, which is fine. And until the end of your turn, the cursed creature, you have to hit them with a weapon you have your Crimson Rite on. This is basically turn 2 to 3 use, because you have to use your bonus action to activate your Crimson Rite. That takes your bonus action. And then next turn you activate your Blood Curse of the Marked to do this. And then you finally get to do the extra damage. But if you're dual wielding, you have to spend an additional bonus action and an additional turn's bonus action to do that again. So turn 1 you activate bonus action Crimson Rite on your first weapon, then Crimson Rite on your second weapon on your second turn, and then Blood Curse. It's just not an efficient system. If the Crimson Rite was just a free action that you can do, it would be leagues better in terms of synergy with what the Bloodhunter is trying to do. But right now, it has a severe problem with action economy. It doesn't know what it wants its bonus action to do, because you have to activate your Crimson Rite, but you also need it to activate your Blood Curse. So two major class features are fighting for a portion of your action economy that you can't properly split between the two, because you're either sacrificing the damage of your Crimson Rite die, or you're sacrificing the utility of your Blood Curse. So this is just a fundamental problem. It has an issue with your action economy. But I digress. An additional War of your Hammercraft die, I would just make it deal max damage, honestly. And it would deal max damage, and if you crit, it does double damage like normal. And the next attack roll, just make it a crit. Just make it a crit, or make it deal 3 to 4 times damage. Just something, because this, getting advantage on your next attack roll, and then dealing double damage with your Hemocraft die, but you still have to roll for it, is, especially with the requirement of it being required that you have a Crimson Rite active, it's just not that good. The Muddled Mind, bonus action, you target a creature within 30 feet of you that is concentrating on a spell or using a feature that requires concentration, so this could also extend to favored foe for rangers. That creature has disadvantage on the next Constitution saving throw it makes to maintain concentration before the end of your turn. And if you amplify it, the cursed creature has disadvantage on all Constitution saving throws made to maintain concentration until the end of your turn. So this is a good utility for if you know you're going to be fighting a lot of spellcasters, like if you're playing Curse of Strahd, and you know you're going to be fighting a lot of vampires who have spells. This is pretty good for that, but I really want to say this is good, and it is, because screwing with people's concentration is really fun. But at the same time, this is more of a mid-game Blood Curse to take, rather than an early game. And finally, Blood Curse of the Soul Eater, level 18, Profane Soul. Creature who isn't undead or construct If they reduce to 0 hit points within 30 feet of you, you can use your reaction, and until the end of your next turn, you make attacks with advantage, and you have resistance to all damage. And if you amplify it, you get to regain an expended Warlock spell slot. And that's it. The reason I say that's it is because you have to finish a long rest before you can do this again, so it's fine. It's not really all that good, but it's okay. Once again, it's too high of a level. It's only for a specific subclass, which makes sense, but then it also has the stipulation of the creature cannot be a construct or undead. So if your DM likes to use a lot of constructs or undead against you, like I do, you'll never really get to use this. And the resistance to all damage and making all attacks at advantage is a nice little buffer, but there's too many things going on here that have to work. First off, you have to spend one of your 4 blood curses to get this. Second off, you have to be level 18 in order to even grab this. Third off, the creature has to be any other creature type other than a construct or undead. Fourth off, they have to drop to 0 hit points. They have to. They can't be at low HP. They can't be at an X amount of HP. They can't even be killed outright, like with power word kill. They have to go to 0 HP. And fifth off, they have to be within 30 feet of you. And for all of those different stipulations that have to be met, required to be met, the only thing you get is advantage on all your attack rolls, which you only have 2 of, by the way, and resistance to all damage, which if you're playing a ranged character, you don't really need the resistance because you're going to be out of range anyway. But here's the thing that's baffling. They encourage you to either play melee or ranged, but a lot of the ranged weapons have a range greater than 30 feet. So it baffles me that you'd have to be within 30 feet of you. It would have to be within 30 feet if you're attempting to use a ranged weapon, because if you're using a ranged weapon, you're going to try and stay as far away from the fight as possible while not taking disadvantage because you're attacking at longer distances. So this incentivizes the Bloodhunter who's playing ranged to get closer to the enemy in order to benefit from this. Yes, they're playing Profane Soul, so, they have Warlock, and, Warlock spells are mostly within 30 feet anyway. But then it goes on to say that if you amplify it, you get an expended Warlock spell slot back. Which, again, is fine. It's fine, but you already get your spell slots back on a short rest. It would be better if the amplification had an additional thing tacked onto it, where additionally you regain an expended Warlock spell slot, and the effect has no range, and it can affect constructs and undead. It's the point of an amplification. The amplification, in my mind, is if you're going to have an ability and have it do a certain thing, and the amplification just adds a new thing to it, it's not really amplifying it to a degree, it's just tacking something on that probably should have already been there to begin with. Or it was kind of a, oops, we have to come up with an amplification, what do we do? And then they just throw something at the wall and hope it sticks. It's kind of what's going on here. Because getting an expended Warlock spell slot back is good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's not a good ability. What I'm saying is that just getting an expended Warlock spell slot back, but also having to limit yourself to the range of 30 feet if you're playing ranged, is not a good trade-off. This would work a lot better if the range initially was either 60 feet or if the amplification made the range infinite. Would this mean that it would also potentially break it? Sure. But it's 18th level. Everything's broken at that point. I think having infinite range on this ability and still having it only be once per long rest is fine. So next we're going to go into the Bloodhunter orders. And as of right now, there's only 4. And so we're going to go after the one that was arguably the most overpowered when the Bloodhunter first came out. the Order of the Ghost Slayer. So at 3rd level, you get access to the Rite of Dawn. And when you activate the Rite of Dawn, the extra damage is now radiant. So you get a Crimson Rite that is now radiant damage. And while it's active, your weapon essentially has the light cantrip. You have resistance to necrotic damage, and when you hit an undead creature with your Rite of Dawn, you roll an additional Hemocraft die. That's about it. So you get a light cantrip, resistance to necrotic damage, which is what most undead are going to be doing to you in terms of damage, if not weapon damage, and you get to deal additional damage against undead. This is basically the paladin. It kind of is a little bit worse though, because you only get to roll an additional Hemocraft die, as opposed to dealing an additional D8 damage with a Divine Smite. And you also don't take damage for the Divine Smite, but you do expend a spell slot to do it. So it's kind of a tie between who's the race to get the worst, who's in first place to get the worst. You gain an additional use of your blood malady feature. In addition, your blood curses can target any creature, whether it has blood or not. So at 3rd level, you get a new rite that does radiant damage, and you just get another use of your feature. This should be standard, folks. This should be standard. You shouldn't have to go a subclass just to get this feature. This is why Moon Druid is more powerful than Land Druid, because you just can do your Wild Shape as a bonus action, which should be standard. But it's not. They saved it for a subclass. This right here, this should be standard. You shouldn't be rewarded for taking a subclass by making the base class better. What I mean by that is, imagine for a second if there was a cleric subclass that overrode the rules for Channel Divinity that says you don't gain more uses of Channel Divinity, you just gain more options. But this cleric subclass just goes, yeah, no, if you get Channel Divinity from more than one source, you get those uses too. You'd be like, wow, that's so overpowered, that's so strong. Yeah, exactly the point. This overrides it. This overrides the whole you can only use it a certain number of times. This should be changed entirely. I don't know what to yet. I'm still working on that. But the fact that this just grants you an additional use that no other subclass gets is... I don't know what they were thinking with that. Aether Walk at 7th level. You can move between the planes, and you can move through other creatures' objects as if they were difficult terrain, and you can affect creatures and objects on the ethereal plane, and you take a d10 force damage if you end your turn in an object. It lasts for a number of rounds equal to your Hemocraft modifier. And if you're inside of an object when it ends, you just get ejected, and you take damage equal to twice the feet you moved. And once you use this, you can't do it again, so you finish a short or long rest. And then you could use it twice per short or long rest at 15th level. Again, ribbon feature. It's fine, you're able to move through walls and people. It's a little bit more it's a little bit better in combat situations than most ribbon features, because you can move through your ally's space without having to squeeze or use some kind of action to do it. So it's a little bit better, but it's still a ribbon feature. Brand of Sundering. At 11th level, your Brand of Castigation. Whenever you hit somebody that has... when you hit a creature with a weapon for which you have an active Crimson Rite, you roll an additional Hemocraft die when determining extra damage, and if the branded creature has incorporeal movement, it cannot move through objects. Very fitting for a Ghost Slayer, but not all that practical. If this stated, additionally, if a branded creature has the incorporeal movement trait, and it says or similar feature, but it also said something along the lines of, additionally, if the branded creature has the incorporeal movement trait or a similar feature, it cannot move through creature spaces or objects while branded, and cannot benefit from like movement speed, so their movement speed's cut in half. So even if it doesn't have those abilities, their movement speed would still be cut in half. It seems kind of weird that a feature that's supposed to be a direct upgrade only affects a specific group, which is fine, but this would be better if it was a little bit more generalized as opposed to being specifically targeted towards incorporeal movement, which only ghosts, banshees, and I think wraiths have. But other than that, it's a little bit too narrow to be useful. And when it is useful, it is extremely useful. Don't get me wrong, but it would also work if it said that the creature couldn't possess anyone. That would also be a pretty interesting take. But that's just my thoughts. Blood Curse of the Exorcist. You gain the Blood Curse of the Exorcist for your Blood Maledict feature, and it doesn't count against the number of Blood Curses you know. So at 15th level, you just get the Blood Curse of the Exorcist for free. Again, free Blood Curse, not really much to say about it. If you had more uses of it, would be fine. Rite Revival. At 18th level, if you have one or more Crimson Rites active and you're reduced to 0, but you don't die outright, you could choose to have one of them end, and you drop to 1 hit point instead. Okay. So this one's fun for the revival aspect, but the fact that you have to have taken damage for your Crimson Rites to activate, and then you have to drop to 0 hit points but not die outright, and then you have to end one of your Crimson Rites to drop to 1 HP instead. This one's a bit of a toss-up. It is 18th level, so it's very weak for an 18th level ability. But what gets me is that it specifically states that you have to have an active Crimson Rite and you just drop to 1 HP. So, meaning you're essentially out that Crimson Rite for the rest of the fight. Because you're at 1 HP, and every time you activate your Crimson Rite, you have to roll your Hemocraft die in order to activate it again. Meaning, this is essentially, you would never want to use this. Because in optimization, we, as a community, don't generally think of healing spells as a very powerful thing. And they shouldn't really be used when a creature is at any HP. For instance, if your Barbarian is at 10 HP, and you know they're going to take half damage from everything, but the attack is 20 points of damage, or the DM's using fixed numbers, and you know that the creature's going to do 20 damage, so reduced to half is 10, he's going to go down next turn. Sure, save him. Go right ahead. Heal him with a healing word, and he'll get his health back. And, you know, if the DM doesn't crit, he survives. However, in a similar scenario, if you know that the monster is going to deal 40 points of damage and you heal him for only 5 points of health with Healing Word, somehow, he's still going to die anyway. So now you've wasted your action, you wasted a spell slot, and your ally is still down. It's better to use a healing spell on an ally that is already down. If they are at 0 HP, and you give them 5 HP, you have healed them 5 HP. But if they are at 10, and then they take 5 points of damage after you've healed them for 5, you've essentially healed none. You've just mitigated 5 damage, which is still a good thing, but you're wasting healing on an already up target. It's always better to use healing spells on a target that's already down, because you get the maximum amount from the healing that you can get. But what this essentially says is no, because you can choose to, yes, you can still choose. You can choose to do it so you could just stay unconscious. But if I remember correctly, let's go back up here. The Crimson Rite lasts until you finish a short or long rest. So it even lasts past when you're unconscious. So this is an ability that you never really want to trigger, because you would be losing your Crimson Rite basically for the rest of the fight until you get healing. And on top of that, you're making the healer's job, or whoever's allowing themselves to have healing capabilities, to not be able to heal you more effectively, because now you're at 1. And then you are going to have to sacrifice some of that HP to get your Crimson Rite back. So I don't understand the purpose of this ability. I'd have to think about how I would change this to be less obnoxious to the healers of the group, but we'll come to that when I remake it eventually. So now we go on to the Order of the Lycan, the one that gives you lycanthropy powers. So, at level 3, you have advantage on perception checks that rely on hearing or smell. Okay, pretty standard. And then Hyper Transformation. As a bonus action, you can transform into a hybrid for an hour. You can speak, use equipment, wear armor, and you can revert to your normal form as a bonus action. And you automatically revert if you fall unconscious or die. And this feature replaces the rules for lycanthropy in the monster manual. You can use this feature You can use this feature once per short or long rest. And the hybrid form can come in 4 different forms. Feral Might. You have advantage on strength checks and strength saving throws, and you have a +1 bonus to melee rolls, which at 11th level becomes a +2, and at 18th level becomes a +3. This one would be good if the bonus was a little bit higher. Because again, a +3 weapon, you would most likely get a +3 weapon since it's only a very rare item at maybe level 10. So having to wait 8 additional levels just to get that in your hybrid form, not doing it. And this should be changed to maybe like a +2 and then like a +3 at 11th, and then you'd be somewhat on par. And then like a level like +4 here at 18th level, why not? Or maybe add something different here, but I digress. Resilient Hide. You have resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magic attacks, not made with silver weapons, and while you're not wearing armor, you have a +1 bonus to AC. So this one literally makes no sense. Because before, it says that you can benefit from armor. And you have proficiency in light and medium armor. So this essentially says while you're not wearing heavy armor, which is fine because you don't have that, you have a +1 bonus to AC. So this is just saying you get a Barbarian's Rage with armor, but you don't really get the same resistances as a Barbarian, so this isn't really your tank subclass. Because of this little section right here. This right here, that says, from non-magical attacks that are made with silver weapons. So this means that the Barbarian actually takes less damage than you, because the Barbarian just takes resistance to all 3 of these damage types from everything. Magical, silver, doesn't matter. They just take half damage from bludgeoning, piercing, slashing damage, period. But you, specifically, from non-magical attacks not made with silver weapons. Which, rules as written, is hilarious because silvered weapons, they are not considered magical. But because this specifies non-magic attacks made with silvered weapons, this means that you can attack them with a silvered weapon that is non-magical and you would still deal the full damage. But if you dealt with a magic weapon that wasn't silvered, you do half damage. So you can literally go to any blacksmith, pay them like 15 silver to silver your weapon, and have nothing else on it, and deal more damage than somebody with like a +3 weapon, if it's not silvered. And a +1 bonus to AC, it's just not that much. Predatory Strikes. You can add your Crimson Right feature to your unarmed strikes, which you treat as one weapon. You can use your Dexterity instead of Strength. For your unarmed strikes, they deal a D6 bludgeoning or slashing damage, and it increases to a D8 at 11th level. And additionally, when you use the attack action to make an unarmed strike, you can make an additional unarmed strike as a bonus action. So you get half of a flurry of blows that doesn't require you to do anything. But once again, it does a d6 damage, so you're essentially using a short sword. And it adds your Crimson Right damage, which I would hope so. And you treat as one weapon. So this is meant to be like the melee person. This is meant to be like the melee option because you're getting bonuses to your claws, bites, whatever. But it's doing less damage than just wielding a bigger weapon, which you can do. And yes, you get an additional unarmed strike as a bonus action, but that's essentially just doing two weapon fighting or dual wielding rules as written, which you can make an attack with a light weapon you're wielding in another hand as a bonus action. You're essentially just two weapon fighting with predatory strikes, but you're doing it with unarmed strikes. And that's just, it's not as good as most people think. And finally, Bloodlust. If you start your turn with fewer hit points than half your maximum, you must succeed a wisdom saving throw, or move towards the nearest creature and attack them. And if you are concentrating on a spell or under the effect that prevents you from concentrating, such as a Barbarian's Rage, you automatically fail. And if you have extra attack feature, you could choose whether or not to use it for this frenzied attack. And if more than one creature is nearby, roll randomly. And once your attack is resolved, you regain control. This is terrible. This is terrible. This incentivizes you as the Bloodhunter to attack your allies unintentionally. Which, granted, can make for great roleplay moments like, hey man, why did you hit me? It's like, sorry, I couldn't control myself. And now you're gonna be that guy who they have to look out for. And honestly, that's just additional work that you don't want to give your party. They don't want to have to worry about being anywhere near you because of what might happen. And making your party build their strategy specifically around what could happen because you decided to do this is not a good way to do teamwork. It's not good teamwork. You're essentially telling the party, I want to do this for roleplay reasons. I don't care if it makes me a detriment in combat. I just am going to do it, and I'm going to hinder the rest of the party's combat for reasons. And if you notice here, it just says, if you start your turn with fewer hit points than half of your maximum, you have to make a save, and then you regain control of yourself if you make your attack or you succeed. But notice what it lacks here. Once per turn. Or, once this has happened, this cannot happen again until your next transformation, yada yada yada. This can happen every turn. So essentially what happens is, let's imagine a scenario for a moment. You're playing a Bloodhunter Lycan, and you drop below half your maximum hit points. You then are forced to walk up to your ally because they happen to be the closest to you because they're playing melee as well, and you bite them. You deal damage to them and you gain control. But since you gained control, you no longer have your action anymore. You just used it. Sure, you have your bonus action, but what are you going to use it for? A blood curse? Okay, cool. But now next turn, if you don't get any kind of healing to get you above that threshold, you have to make that save again. And if you fail, you attack your party member again. And notice what it says here. You move directly towards them. You use your own movement speed. Meaning, during your turn, if your ally is within 30 feet of you, and they are the closest one, you have to walk your full 30 feet over there, attack them, then you regain control, but you just used all of your movement. You've used your action to attack them because you had to, and you don't have a bonus action dash. Meaning you are stuck next to them. Now, if you fail the saving throw next time, your ally is automatically within 5 feet of you. So you're putting your party in danger. You're making it less optimal for the party to be anywhere near you or anywhere near the enemy because that's where you're gonna be. Now the healer or whoever is in charge of making sure people stay up has to worry about keeping you and wasting spell slots on you to keep you above that threshold to make sure you don't become a detriment to the party. This one is terrible. I understand the flavor of it, but in terms of teamwork, cooperation, it's just not a good thing to have in combat. You don't want to have to attack your enemies or your allies if you can help it. If you can help it, you shouldn't have to have that. Anyway, next up Stalker's Prowess. At 7th level, your speed increases by 10 feet, and you can add 10 feet to your long jump distance and 3 feet to your high jump distance. And your hybrid form also gains the following benefit. Improved predatory strikes. You have a +1 bonus to attack rolls made with your unarmed strikes. The bonus increases to a +2 at 11th, +3 at 18th, and when you have an active Crimson Rite on your unarmed strikes while in hybrid form, your unarmed strikes are considered magical. That's it. So, a level later than monks, your unarmed strikes only while in your hybrid form become magical. You get a +1, and it still has the same problem as before with Feral Might, where the bonus only comes in later. When by at least level 10 you would get a +3 weapon, so having to wait 5 additional to 8 additional levels just to get a +3 weapon is not that good. Advanced Transformation at 11th level, you can use your hybrid transformation feature twice, regaining all uses on a short rest and a long rest. And you also gain the ability of Lycan Regeneration, where at the start of each of your turns, if you have at least 1 hit point, but you have fewer hit points than half of your maximum, you gain hit points equal to 1 plus your Constitution modifier. And if you are in hybrid form, you gain these hit points before you must make the saving throw for your Bloodlust. So, you essentially gain the Champion Fighter's final feature at 11th level, but worse. Because you have to have at least 1 hit point, and you have to be fewer than half. So it's the same as the Champion Fighters, but you gain less hit points for the same thing. And you're still using your bonus action to transform. You're still using your bonus action for your Crimson Rite. You're still using your bonus action for your Blood Curses. It's just terrible action economy. And this isn't really a way to mitigate the Bloodlust downside. The brand of Voracious. So at 15th level, you have advantage on saving throws, on the saving throw for your Bloodlust, if you took that. Your brand of Castigation can now bind a foe to your Hunter's Ferocity. While in your hybrid form, you have advantage on attack rolls against a creature that's been branded by you. Okay, I think 15th level is a little bit high to get advantage on all your attack rolls against a foe that you have to hit with your brand first. And having advantage on your saving throw against your Bloodlust at 15th level, that would probably have been better at around like 7th level. Because this is just far too late. If you have Bloodlust still, or Bloodlust at this point, it's just... Oh, my mistake. You gain all of these benefits, quote unquote. So you don't even get to choose if you have Bloodlust. You just have these. So basically, for 12 levels, you have to worry about going ballistic on somebody. Fantastic. And Hybrid Transformation Mastery. You can transform an unlimited number of times, and it lasts until you revert to your normal form or fall unconscious or die, and you gain the Blood Curse of the Howl at 18th level. That's it. So, this isn't the worst. I think the Mutant is worse than this, but the fact that you don't get to choose the benefit that you get when you transform, and it still requires your bonus action. It lasts an hour, sure, but the fact that you have to wait until 15th level to get advantage on the saving throw against a thing that can cause you to harm your teammates is far too late. So for a vast majority of the game, if not the entire game, you are going to be a liability to your party because you don't know when you're going to go ballistic on somebody. And even at 18th level, the blood curse you get still requires your action, so you can't even attack that turn. So you're losing out on damage for the sake of a fear and a possible stun. It's overall just not that good mechanically. This is the one I'm probably going to change the most when I rework it. Next up is Order of the Mutant. You get Mutagen Craft, where you know formulas. As a bonus action, you can consume a mutagen, and they last until you finish a short or long rest, or until the mutagen specifies. While one or more mutagens are affecting you, you can use an action to focus and flush all mutagens from your system, ending all of their effects and side effects. They're designed for specific people, and your mutagens have no effect on other creatures, yada yada yada. And they become inert if you don't use them before a short or long rest. So, at 3rd level, when you get this feature, you can know 4 formulas and you can create 1. So we're going to go now. So the number of mutagens you can concoct when you finish a rest and the number of formulas is shown above. When you learn a new formula, you can replace one formula that you know with another. You choose 4 mutagen formulas and you learn from the options detailed at the end. And you can concoct 1 mutagen when you finish a short or long rest. Okay, so you can create 1 at 3rd level, you can create 2 at 7th and 11th level, and then you can create 3 at 15th and 18th level. At which point you would get 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, respectively. So 4 for 3rd level, 5 for 7th level, 6 for 11th level, 15th is 7, and 18th is 8. At 7th level, you get Strange Metabolism, where you gain immunity to poison, and the poison damage and poison condition, and you can trigger a burst of adrenaline that lets you resist the negative effects of a mutagen. So, as a bonus action, you can ignore the negative side effect of 1 mutagen affecting you for a minute, and you can only do so once per long rest. So already, this is one of the worst, because yes, Lichen gave you 1 negative side effect for transforming, being the fact that you may attack your allies, but this, in order to even drink the dang thing, you have to spend a bonus action to consume it. So if we go back to that previous example of a ranger or fighter with crossbow expert and +3 dexterity, if you go mutant, you have to spend your first turn drinking your mutagen, assuming you don't have it already. So assuming you don't have it already, you have to spend a bonus action to drink your mutagen. Then you have to spend another bonus action to use your Crimson Right, and then you have to spend another bonus action to use your Blood Maledict. So you're still getting your normal attacks in, but you're wasting that extra damage that you would get from the bonus action attack on doing basic class features that you should have access to regardless. And we're going to get to the formulas. So the Brand of Axiom. At 11th level, your mutagenic Hemocraft lets your Brand of Castigation reveal a foe's true nature. It basically gives you the ability to see through their illusion. So any illusion or invisibility effect on a creature when you branded ends, and the creature cannot benefit from invisibility or illusion effects while branded. And if a creature that is branded by you is in an alternate form by polymorph or by a shapeshifter ability, it must make a wisdom save or revert to its true form and be stunned until the end of your next turn. And if a branded creature attempts to alter its form, it must make a wisdom save or have the attempt fail and be stunned until the end of your next turn. Once again, I think paralyzed would have been a better condition. This is a very big ribbon feature though, because it doesn't help you in every situation. Yes, it does help you if somebody's invisible, but the fact that the invisibility condition and the invisibility spell makes it so that because you can't see them and they're considered heavily obscured, you have disadvantage on attack rolls against that creature. You have a very low chance. You have on average a 65% chance to hit anything at a given time. But with disadvantage, that goes down to like a 35% chance to hit. With advantage, it goes up to an 87. And you can get these numbers by taking the amount that you would hit. I can pull up the math here in a little bit, but essentially, having disadvantage is worse than advantage, obviously. But you can only really use this against things like mirror image, minor illusion if they're for whatever reason using it, blur, blink, obviously invisibility, greater invisibility, and then the polymorph, pretty much anything that can change their form. And not a lot of things are going to have that. So it's kind of more of a ribbon feature than it is anything. It's good when you have to fight something that does have that, like a dragon who can change its form, but outside of that, it's not really all that useful. Blood Curse of Corrosion, you gain the Blood Curse of Corrosion. That's it. And then the Exalted Mutagen. As a bonus action, at 18th level, you can choose one mutagen currently affecting you, its effects and side effects end, and you can immediately have a mutagen you know the formula to take its place. And you can use this a number of times equal to your Hemocraft modifier, and you regain all uses on the long rest. So this is essentially an in-combat swap of two things. It's fine, it's not good, whatever. It's not a really good capstone for the subclass, but you get what you get with the subclass is bad. So each mutagen has a benefit and a downside. And when you take the mutagen, all of it happens at once. So you got Aether, which has a prerequisite of 11th level, where you have a flying speed of 20 feet for an hour, but you have disadvantage on strength checks and dexterity checks. All of them. And since a initiative roll is a dexterity based check, it gets disadvantage too. Meaning, for the low cost of disadvantage on every strength check you could possibly make, and all of your initiative checks, for 1 hour, you can fly 20 feet, a third of what the fly spell can do, at 11th level, when every other spellcaster gets the fly spell at 5th level. So, for 6 additional levels of wait time, you get a third of the speed. Awesome. Alluring. This you could take this anytime. Your skin and voice become malleable, allowing you to enhance your appearance and presence, and you have advantage on charisma checks, but you have disadvantage on initiative rolls. So, once again, roleplay for combat. It's fine. Maybe not something you'd want all the time, but it's certainly good if you're having social situations. Definitely a pickup if you're playing that kind of character. Celerity. Your dexterity score increases by 3, as does your maximum. However, you have disadvantage on wisdom saving throws. Your dexterity score and your maximum increase by 4 if you consume this mutagen at 11th level, and by 5 at 18th level. So, at 18th level, you can potentially get a plus 5 to your dexterity score, increasing you by at least a plus 2 in the modifier. For disadvantage on wisdom saving throws, which is the most common spell save. Personally, it's not worth it if you're going to have to make a wisdom save to save against frighten, charm, fear, like pretty much anything. A fear spell, I think Raimi's psychic lance, modify memory, everything. It's just not worth it. Conversant. You have advantage on intelligence checks, but you have disadvantage on wisdom checks. Again, more of a roleplay since it's based on checks, not saves. So if you want to play a smart Bloodhunter, sure. Cruelty, prerequisite of 11th level. When you use the attack action, you can make an additional weapon attack as a bonus action. However, you have disadvantage on all mental saves, so intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Not worth it in the slightest. Not worth it. Because having disadvantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, yeah, it's not as bad as having disadvantage on strength, dexterity, and constitution, which you have 2 out of the 3 best saves. While as this one you only have 1 out of the 3. The fact that you have disadvantage on wisdom saves specifically is a big detriment, because once again, like Conversant, that's most of the spells in the game, next to dexterity. So getting the ability to use 2 weapon fighting, rules as written, just for disadvantage when people can do it normally without disadvantage on those saves is hell not worth it. Embers. Yeah, no, sorry, I missed one. Deafness. You have advantage on dex checks, but you have disadvantage on wisdom checks. Again, not worth it for the mentions previously. Or sorry, for the reasons I mentioned previously. Embers. You have resistance to fire damage and vulnerability to cold. A lot of these now going down if they just give you a resistance to a damage type and then vulnerability to another damage type. So, Gelid, you have resistance to cold but vulnerable to fire. Impermeable, you have resistance to piercing and vulnerability to slashing. Again, kind of just with these, take whichever one is the most suitable for the situation. Because honestly, if you're like playing a desert campaign and a lot of the things do fire damage, then you might want to take embers. And then later on you want to take something else, go right ahead. Mobility, you're immune to grappled and restrained. However, you have disadvantage on strength checks, and at 11th level, you're immune to paralyzed. So this would be good if it also made you immune to stunned. This would be really good if it made you immune to stunned, but it doesn't. It's still a good one to take if your DM is the kind of person who likes to grapple, restrain, or paralyze you. And it's very strange because it gives you disadvantage on strength checks, and the strength check is traditionally what is used when you're trying to make a grapple check. So it's a little bit strange why you'd have disadvantage on that when you have immunity to the thing that you're mostly going to be using it for. I personally would have made this like you can't be grappled, but it's I don't know. It's super strange that you have disadvantage on checks that the ability grants you immunity to, but whatever. Night Eye, you have dark vision out to 60 feet. If you already have dark vision, it increases by an additional 60 feet. However, you have disadvantage on attack rolls and perception checks that rely on sight. The target of your attack or whatever you are trying to perceive is in direct sunlight. So Night Eye essentially gives you better dark vision, but gives you sunlight sensitivity. Good for underground sessions or in dungeons where there's not a lot of direct sunlight, because rules as written, because it says direct sunlight, lamplight and the light cantrip and anything that you would find in a dungeon that isn't a skylight is technically not sunlight, so you wouldn't have sunlight sensitivity in there, no matter how bright it is. And even the daylight spell doesn't trigger sunlight sensitivity. Percipient. Advantage on wisdom checks, but disadvantage on charisma checks. Awesome. I would recommend taking this, because having advantage on wisdom checks and then taking resilient wisdom for the proficiency in wisdom saving throws, you can become proficient in wisdom saves, have advantage on wisdom checks. It's fantastic. So yeah, Percipient, it's a pretty nice one. I mean, advantage on wisdom saves. Recommend it. It is one of the most well-rounded, and you're not really going to be using charisma all that much. So definitely one I would recommend picking up. Potency, it's the same as celerity. So instead of dexterity, you increase your strength score by 3, but you have disadvantage on dexterity saves, and at 11th level you get a +4, and at 18th level it's a +5. If you're going for a strength-based build, go with this. If you're going for a dex-based build, go with celerity. Pretty standard. Precision, at 11th level, you critically strike on a 19 and 20, but you have disadvantage on strength saves. This is one I personally would recommend, because strength saving throws don't really come up all that much. And critting on a 19 to 20, it's not good. It takes you from a 5% to a 10% chance to critically strike, but if you're going order of the mutant or the lichen, whichever one, I think it was the Ghost Slayer that actually gives you the crit, you get a mutagen back. Or no, sorry, that was the baseline class. The base class, because you crit, you get a use of your Blood Maledict. This is one I could recommend if you were going mutant, just at higher levels if you wanted to play a level 20 Bloodhunter, mutant Bloodhunter, and get your Blood Maledicts back 5% faster. Sure. Rapidity, your movement speed increased by 10 feet, however you have disadvantage on intelligence checks. And at 15th level, you get an additional 5 feet of movement speed. So, for waiting roughly 14, 13 levels, you get an additional 15 feet of movement speed. For disadvantage on intelligence checks. It's checks, so I don't really think that's all that bad. This would definitely be like a generalist one, similar to Precipient. I personally would recommend it, but I know some optimizers would say, no, don't take this one because intelligence saves are still a thing, and a lot of spellcasters have them because they know that wisdom is going to be the most used. So, take it with a grain of salt. Reconstruction. You have to be 7th level for this. So for 1 hour, at the start of each of your turns, when you have at least 1 hit point, but fewer than hit points than half of your maximum, you regain hit points equal to your proficiency bonus, but your speed is reduced by 10 feet. So, this one is one that I would recommend as a precaution. So what I mean by this is like if you start combat, or if you're going through a dungeon, and you know you're going to take a lot of hits because you're playing melee, I would recommend taking this for the generalist once you got done with the combat encounter and you're just exploring and going through the dungeon. Use reconstruction to get your HP back, because that's for every 6 seconds you get at this point 4 HP plus 3 to 4 HP every 6 seconds for an hour. So if we just open up our calculator right now, we're going to go with 3 HP every 6 seconds, and there are 10 rounds, so you get 30 HP per minute. And there's 60 minutes, so you would multiply this by 60, meaning over the course of an hour you can heal 1,800 HP. Definitely a really good out of combat healing. And it's not while in combat either. So you can just have this on until you reach half your maximum, or if you constantly keep hitting traps, you can basically have this on, trigger all the traps, and just heal it all back. I mean, it's fine. Sagacity. So basically this is just potency or celerity, but you get an increase of your intelligence by 3, but disadvantage on charisma, and 4 at 11th level, and 5 at 18th level. If this was wisdom, it would be a lot better, but I can understand why it's not, because you already have Precipient. So if you could have Precipient and Sagacity at the same time, that would be insane. Shielded. Resistance to slashing damage, vulnerability to bludgeoning. Unbreakable. Resistance to bludgeoning, vulnerability to piercing. And finally, Vermilion. You gain an additional use of your Blood Maledict, but you have disadvantage on death saves. This one's not that bad. I would recommend taking it because it gives you another use of your Blood Maledict, which once again is something that only the Ghost Hunter gets, or Ghost Slayer. And having this on another subclass is good. But once again, if I am going to try and revisit this and change it to be a little bit more in line with the other classes, Vermilion's definitely going to be one of those things that's not going to be a thing anymore. And having more uses of Blood Maledict and having more options for Blood Maledict is going to be the standard. Finally, apologies. Finally is the Order of the Profane Soul. This is the only one that gets spellcasting. So they did update it because before it just had the Archfey, the Undying, like the Archfey and the Undying, but then it got updated when Tasha's Cauldron and Van Richten's came out. It also has the Celestial and Hexblade, so, you know, pretty standard Warlock affair. You get the Pact Magic, the cantrips, the spell slots, spells known. You know, pretty standard stuff here. But I think the main difference here is that it uses your Hemocraft modifier. So instead of being a Charisma one, you would actually be a Intelligence or Wisdom based Hemocraft user. So you also notice here that you only get up to 4th level, and you don't get any Mystic Arcanum. And you only get 3 cantrips as opposed to the Warlocks, like, if you play it optimally, like 7 to 8 different cantrips you can get. If you go Pact of the Tome, then you get Magic Adapt, and you get the normal cantrips that Warlocks get. You also get Spells Known, the spell slots that you have, which you only get 2 of, which kind of sucks. But, you know, it's pretty standard. You use either Charisma or Wisdom. Your spell casting works exactly like Warlocks. And, you know, all that. Where it differs, however, is the right focus. So, each patron from Warlock that you can pick has their own effect that you get when you pick them. So instead of getting subclass features, you just get Warlock features for different subclasses. So, for the Archfey, when you choose it, when you damage a creature with a weapon for which you have a Crimson Right on, it glows, and it glows until the end of your next turn. And for the duration, they can't benefit from any cover or from being invisible. So basically, you just cast, not Dancing Lights, Fairy Fire on them. With the Celestial as a bonus action, you could use your Blood Curse to heal somebody within 60 feet for equal to your Hemocraft die plus your Hemocraft modifier, so Intelligence or Wisdom. Basically, just give them a healing word until later, where it becomes kind of like a better cure wounds at a distance. The Fathomless, you basically just get to breathe underwater, and once per turn, when you deal a damage with a creature which you have a Crimson Right, you reduce their speed by 10. So, like Chill Touch, or not Chill Touch, but Shocking Grasp, I think, or it's one of those cantrips that just reduces their movement speed. I think it's Frostbite. The Fiend, if you roll a 1 or a 2 on a damage die, when you roll the extra damage for your Crimson Right, you re-roll the die and choose whichever one. The Genie is a bonus action. You can give yourself a fly speed of 30 feet for a number of rounds equal to your Hemocraft modifier by expending a use of your Blood Maledict. With the Great Old One, when you critically strike against a creature, that creature and any creatures of your choice within 10 feet are frightened until the end of your turn. No save, just happens. The Hexblade, when you successfully target a creature with a Blood Curse, the next time you hit them with an attack while the Blood Curse is in effect, you get to deal additional damage equal to your proficiency modifier. The Undead Warlock, when you take necrotic damage, you could use your reaction to have it, and your appearance changes to reflect some aspects of your patron while you have a Crimson Right active. And the Undying, when you reduce a creature of at least mild threat, which is a DM's discretion, to 0 hit points, you regain a number of hit points equal to your Hemocraft die. I mean, some of these are fine. I think the best one here by far is the Genie, because the fly speed is just so strong. I would argue also the Great Old One giving a Frighten effect with no save is pretty good. The additional damage from the Hexblade is pretty nice. And the Celestial is good for your like support playstyle, and the Undying is good for survivability if you're going melee. Mystic Frenzy. You can use your action. When you use your action to cast a cantrip, you can make one weapon attack as a bonus action. This is basically the same thing that the Eldritch Knight Fighter gets. And additionally, at 7th level, you can cast this spell using any pack magic slot, and you can't do hold on. Using any pack magic spell slot, and you can do seconds. So basically, you get one spell you can cast once per long rest, but you still have to expend a spell slot. So for the Archfey, that's Blur, the Celestial is Lesser Restoration, the Fathomless is Gust of Wind, the Fiend is Scorching Ray, the Genie is Phantasmal Force, the Great Old One is Detect Thoughts, Hexblade is Branding Smite, the Undead is Blindness and Deafness, and the Undying is Silence. At 11th level, you get Brand of the Sapping Scar. So, a creature branded by you has disadvantage on saving throws against your Warlock spells. This would be better as a utility if it just had disadvantage on the saving throws against spells until the end of your turn or whenever the brand goes away. That would be much better, but I can understand why they didn't do that. And then at 15th level, you get another thing similar to the Revealed Arcana at 7th level, where your patron just gives you a spell that you can cast once per long rest by expending a spell slot. Oh, sorry. At 15th level, this one, the 15th level spell, you don't expend a spell slot for. So for the Archfey, it's Slow, the Celestial is Revivify, Fathomless is Lightning Bolt, Fiend is Fireball, Genie is Protection from Energy, the Great Old One is Haste, Hexblade is Blink, Undead is Speak with Dead, and Undying is Bestow Curse. And finally, at 18th level, Blood Curse of the Soul Stealer, you gain the Blood Curse of the Soul Stealer. So in general, I think this one is pretty okay. It kind of sucks that you don't get a specific right to yourself other than the right focus. Like the Lycan does with its bestial transformation, the Ghost Slayer gets with its own specific right, and the Mutant gets its own unique thing. But it kind of sucks, but you also get spells, and spells are generally pretty powerful. I think overall, the most powerful one is the Archfey because Slow is just such a good spell. I think a close second based on the power level would probably be the Genie, even if the Genie spells aren't that good. Like, Phantasmal Force is pretty good, and Protection from Energy is alright. It's not useful in every situation, and you'd be better with, like, Absorb Elements, but it's still good. So, that is my review of the Bloodhunter class. What would I do to change it? Honestly, I think I'd have to start working on it and read this a bit more to figure out what I would change. Like, obviously, I'd change the Hemocraft die mechanics, the blood curses, give them access to more blood curses, maybe change some of the proficiencies, change how Hunter's Bane works, the Blood Maledict. I'm actually currently reworking the fighting style system as we speak. Crimson Rite is fine. The orders, obviously, the Ghost Slayer is fine where it is. It's one of the better ones. The Profane Soul can probably stay where it is. The Lycan and the Mutant are probably going to need the most love. But other than that, it's not the best class. I would say in terms of power level, if we're talking about the hierarchy of the martial classes being that the Barbarian and the Rogue are at the bottom because of versatility, the Monk is at the top, and then Fighter is below the Monk. I would say this is probably between the Fighter and the Barbarian Rogue sharing the bottom spot. Because there's just not a lot of versatility with it. A lot of the blood curses don't really do much. And all of them, or most of them, require a bonus action. Not a lot of them trigger off of different effects. Some of them are available way too late. Some of them are only available to certain subclasses that, honestly, they still come too late. And the subclasses themselves are just not that strong in comparison. The features that you think would help don't really help all that much, and they kind of fall off later on in the game because of the amount of damage that you're missing. There's not a lot of utility. It just needs more versatility and more things to do other than I start my turn, I use my blood curse, and then I attack twice, end turn, go to next turn, use my bonus action to activate my Crimson Rite, or the opposite, attack twice, and then end turn, and then I have to use my bonus action again to use my main subclass feature, and then now that 3 turns have passed, I finally get to play the game, and then by that point, the combat's pretty much already over. because let's just be honest here, not a lot of comments are going past 3 turns. But anyway, I'd like to thank you so much for joining me on my first episode of the Homebrew review. Like, comment, subscribe, and I hope to see you guys next time. Bye-bye.